A crumbling map hidden behind ancient floorboards would bring treasure hunters and historians flocking to a forgotten farmstead in the rural countryside, all triggered by one desperate man's decision to renovate his late uncle's dilapidated farm that would unearth what experts are now calling the most significant historical discovery in the region since the founding of the colony. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer heat pressed down on Nathan Carter's shoulders as he studied the bank's final notice in his trembling hands. The harsh sunlight streaming through the dusty windows illuminated the creases in his weary face, each line a testament to years of corporate burnout and recent personal failures. 30 days. After losing his tech company job during the latest round of layoffs and burning through his savings while trying to launch a failed startup, he had just 30 days to somehow make mortgage payments before the bank seized the property. He'd unexpectedly inherited 3 months ago. Nathan set the notice down beside the scattered bills and renovation estimates that had become a permanent fixture on the rickety dining table. The same table where his eccentric Uncle Elijah had apparently taken all his meals alone for 40 years, where the old man had sketched peculiar drawings that locals dismissed as the imaginings of a recluse, and where Nathan's desperate hopes for a fresh start had slowly withered alongside the neglected fields that stretched beyond the cracked windows. At 38, Nathan had endured setbacks that would have broken many people. The collapse of his marriage to Rebecca 2 years ago had left him questioning every life choice. The corporate career that had structured his adult life had given him financial stability, but hadn't prepared him for the ruthless restructuring that eliminated his entire department. His hasty decision to invest severance pay in a technology venture had depleted his emergency funds, just as this unexpected inheritance demanded immediate attention and resources. "Is that what I think it is?" Maya's voice pulled Nathan from his worried calculations. At 24, his younger sister had paused her graduate studies in historical archaeology to help salvage the inherited property, a decision that filled Nathan with complicated emotions. Pride in her dedication battled with guilt that Maya's academic future was being sacrificed to what increasingly seemed like a hopeless cause. Nathan didn't try to hide the notice. They had long since passed the point where protective lies served any purpose. 30 days before they foreclose, he confirmed, his voice steady despite the devastation the words represented. "Unless we can come up with $24,000 for the back, taxes and critical repairs the county inspector is demanding." Maya dropped into the chair across from her brother, her young face momentarily betraying the weight of their situation before she masked it with determined optimism. "Something will work out, Nate. Maybe that historical society grant will finally come through. Or we could try approaching that home renovation show that features old farmhouses with interesting backstories." Nathan nodded, not wanting to extinguish his sister's hope with the harsh realities he'd already confirmed through countless phone calls and emails. The preservation grants were tied up in bureaucratic delays. The television producers had expressed initial interest, but ultimately passed on featuring a property with insufficient historical significance. The local bank had already rejected their loan application, citing Nathan's unemployment and the property's poor condition as prohibitive risk factors. "We'll figure something out," Nathan agreed, pushing back from the table. "But first, I need to finish tearing up those damaged floorboards in the study. If we don't address the termite damage before the inspector returns next week, we won't even have a chance at an extension." This was the Carter way, facing insurmountable problems by focusing on the immediate tasks at hand. One day at a time, one project at a time. The emotional reckoning could wait until after the day's work was done. As Nathan pulled on his work gloves, the landline rang, a surprisingly functioning relic in a house that seemed frozen in time. Both siblings looked at the old wall-mounted unit with surprise. "Carter Residence," Nathan answered, automatically adopting the formal tone he'd heard his uncle use during childhood visits to the farm. The voice on the other end belonged to Eleanor Jenkins, the elderly town historian who had shown unexpected interest in the property since Nathan's arrival. "Nathan, dear, I've been reviewing those old county records I mentioned. There's something quite curious about your uncle's property boundaries that doesn't match the original land grants. I wonder if I might stop by tomorrow to discuss it." Nathan's interest was piqued, despite his preoccupation with the impending foreclosure. "Of course, Miss Jenkins. Around 10? Perfect. And Nathan, have you found anything unusual during your renovations? Papers, odd artifacts, anything that seemed out of place?" The question struck him as strangely specific. "Just decades of my uncle's unusual hobbies." "Why do you ask?" There was a slight pause before she responded. "Just historical curiosity. Your property sits on what was once a significant colonial-era trade route. Old houses sometimes yield surprising historical footnotes." After ending the call, Nathan met Maya's questioning gaze. "The town historian wants to discuss some boundary discrepancy tomorrow. Probably nothing, but at least it's a distraction from impending financial doom." Maya's expression suggested she wasn't convinced the visit was insignificant. "Ms. Jenkins has been remarkably interested in Uncle Elijah's property. Dad always said the locals thought Uncle Elijah was hiding something valuable out here. If he was hiding money, he did it too well," Nathan replied with gallows humor. "Could certainly use some buried treasure right about now." The summer afternoon stretched endlessly as Nathan attacked the damaged floorboards in what had once been his uncle's study. The room was peculiar even by the standards of the eccentric old man. Walls lined with bookshelves containing obscure historical texts, topographical maps of the surrounding countryside mounted in mismatched frames, and curious markings etched directly into the wooden doorframe that resembled no language Nathan recognized. The damaged section of flooring extended from the center of the room toward the large stone fireplace that dominated the northern wall. As Nathan pried up each board, he marveled at the solid oak construction underneath the damaged surface layer, craftsmanship rarely seen in modern construction. Despite the termite damage to the top layer, the structural supports remained surprisingly intact. He had removed approximately 8 square feet of flooring when his pry bar struck something that wasn't wood. The metallic clang reverberated through the room, causing him to pause and examine the area more carefully. Beneath the next floorboard, Nathan discovered a small metal box, approximately the size of a hardcover book. Its surface tarnished with age, but its lock mechanism still intact. "Maya," he called, curiosity temporarily overriding his fatigue. "Found something weird under the floor." His sister appeared in the doorway moments later, her archaeological training immediately evident in her cautious approach to the discovery. "Don't force the lock," she advised, kneeling beside him to examine the box. "That's hand-forged ironwork, probably mid-19th century. We should document everything exactly as we found it." Maya's phone camera carefully captured the box's position, the surrounding floor cavity, and multiple angles of the box itself before she gently lifted it from its hiding place. The box was surprisingly heavy for its size, suggesting contents more substantial than papers. "Should we open it?" Nathan asked, suddenly feeling like a child discovering buried treasure, a welcome distraction from their financial predicament. Maya examined the lock mechanism with professional interest. The key would be ideal, but given our time frame and circumstances... She retrieved a slender metal tool from her pocket that looked suspiciously like something from a lock-picking set. At Nathan's raised eyebrow, she shrugged. "Archaeological field training includes practical skills. Sometimes museum storage units have old locks." With surprising efficiency, she manipulated the ancient mechanism until a satisfying click signaled success. They exchanged anticipatory glances before Maya carefully lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in deteriorating velvet lining, lay several items: a leather-bound journal with faded handwriting, a brass key of unusual design, and most intriguingly, a folded parchment that, when carefully opened, revealed itself to be a hand-drawn map of the farm property, but with structures and landmarks that existed nowhere on the current homestead. "This isn't Uncle Elijah's handwriting," Nathan observed, carefully examining the journal's first pages. "These dates are from the 1870s. Maya was already studying the map with focused intensity. "This shows a completely different layout than the current farm. Look at these markings here, and this structure that should be right about where the old stone barn foundation is now." As they carefully examined the journal entries, a narrative began to emerge that seemed more suited to fiction than their family history. The writer, who identified himself as Thomas Everett, described in careful detail the construction of a secure repository beneath the property, designed to protect materials of significant historical and monetary value from those who would claim by force what they could not possess by right. "Nathan," Maya whispered, her academic training momentarily overcome by the implications of what they were reading, "I think this is describing a hidden storage space, possibly a tunnel or vault, constructed on this property to hide something valuable during the post-Civil War period." The journal detailed the careful engineering required to create a concealed entrance, water drainage systems to prevent flooding, and most tantalizingly, references to the collection being secured beneath the hearthstone, beyond reach of the unworthy. Nathan's gaze moved automatically to the massive stone fireplace that dominated the study wall. "You don't think—" Maya was already moving toward the fireplace, examining the flagstones that formed its base with newfound purpose. "The map shows something extending from this general area. If the journal is accurate, there should be some kind of access mechanism." Their financial troubles temporarily forgotten, the siblings spent the next hour carefully examining every inch of the fireplace structure. The breakthrough came when Nathan, recalling the unusual markings on the doorframe, noticed similar faint etchings on one of the stones that formed the fireplace surround. "These markings match," he realized, tracing the pattern with his finger. "They're not random at all, they're directional indicators." Following the implied instruction, they applied pressure to specific points on the surrounding stonework in the sequence suggested by the markings. After several attempts, a grinding sound emerged from within the masonry, and a previously invisible seam appeared as one of the hearthstones shifted slightly. "It's a counterweight system," Maya explained with professional admiration, examining the cleverly disguised mechanism, Civil War-era engineering at its finest. Together they lifted the stone, revealing a narrow opening barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through, with crude stone steps descending into darkness. Cool, dry air wafted upward, suggesting a space that somehow remained ventilated despite being sealed for potentially decades or longer. "We should document everything before going further," Maya insisted, her archaeological training reasserting itself despite the excitement of discovery. "And we need proper equipment, lights, possibly breathing protection if there's old dust or mold down there." Nathan nodded agreement, but his mind was already racing with implications if the journal's references to valuable historical materials were accurate. This discovery could potentially solve their financial crisis. However, his practical business experience also highlighted complications, legal questions about ownership of historical artifacts, potential claims by historical societies or museums, and the immediate need to secure the site against trespassers. Once word inevitably spread, the siblings gathered flashlights, dust masks, and Maya's field documentation kit before returning to the study. The hidden opening remained as they had left it, a dark mouth in the floor promising secrets that had remained untold for generations. "I'll go first," Nathan insisted, securing a powerful flashlight to his head with a makeshift strap. The structural integrity could be compromised after all this time. Maya nodded, setting up her phone camera on a tripod to record their initial exploration. "Don't touch anything that looks historically significant, and if you see any signs of collapse, we back out immediately." Nathan lowered himself into the opening, finding the stone steps narrow but solid beneath his weight. The air quality surprised him, cool and remarkably free of the musty odor he had expected from a sealed, underground space. As he descended, the beam of his flashlight revealed a tunnel extending approximately 8 feet before opening into what appeared to be a larger chamber. "It's stable," he called back to Maya. "Steps are solid. There's a room ahead." Maya followed, her own light adding illumination to the underground space. As they reached the bottom of the steps, both siblings stood in momentary awe of what their lights revealed. The chamber was approximately 15 feet square, its walls lined with rough-hewn stone that had been mortared into remarkably sound construction. More impressive than the engineering, however, was what the chamber contained. Along one wall stood a row of wooden cabinets, their craftsmanship still evident despite decades of isolation. A large oak table occupied the center of the room, its surface covered with what appeared to be maps, documents, and strange instruments preserved by the room's stable environment. Most striking, however, were the locked chests positioned strategically around the chamber, 6 in total, each secured with mechanisms similar to the box they had discovered above. "This is," Maya whispered, "professional terminology, temporarily," failing her in the face of such a pristine historical find. "A time capsule," Nathan finished, sweeping his light across the untouched artifacts. "Completely sealed and preserved." Maya moved toward the table, careful not to disturb the dust-covered documents. Her light revealed yellowed pages covered in the same handwriting as the journal they had found, alongside maps that appeared to detail regional waterways and what might be transportation routes. Strange symbols annotated certain locations, symbols that matched those on the doorframe and fireplace stones above. "This is a Confederate smuggling operation," she realized aloud, her archaeological training allowing her to interpret the historical context. These maps show supply routes that bypassed Union blockades during the Civil War. These symbols are a code system for identifying safe houses and storage locations. Nathan had moved to one of the cabinets, carefully opening its doors to reveal rows of leather-bound volumes. These look like financial records, names, dates, amounts. This one's labeled Richmond Consortium, 1863-1864. As they continued their careful exploration, a coherent historical narrative began to emerge from the preserved materials. The chamber had been constructed by a group calling themselves the Heritage Coalition, Southern sympathizers who had operated a sophisticated network for moving valuable assets beyond Union reach during the final years of the Civil War. Unlike many such operations, however, this group's motivation appeared more complex than simple Confederate loyalty. "Listen to this," Maya said, carefully reading from what appeared to be a manifesto placed prominently on the central table. "We preserve these artifacts not for purposes of insurrection, but for the preservation of cultural heritage that would otherwise be destroyed by the victors. History belongs to all who lived it, not merely those who write its conclusion." Nathan had begun examining one of the locked chests, finding its mechanism similar to the smaller box they had discovered. Above, "Do you think the brass key might—" Maya carefully retrieved the key from the pouch where she had secured their earlier finds, handing it to her brother with scholarly caution. "Try it, but go slowly. If this is what I think it is, the contents could have significant historical value." The key fit perfectly, turning with surprising ease after a careful application of pressure. The chest's lid opened to reveal a velvet-lined interior containing what appeared to be carefully wrapped parcels. Nathan gently lifted one, unwinding its protective covering to reveal a glittering golden coin unlike any modern currency. Spanish. Doubloons, Maya identified immediately, her academic specialization in colonial artifacts proving unexpectedly relevant. Probably mid-18th century, and there are dozens of them in this chest alone. Nathan's mind immediately began calculating potential values, not just the considerable historical significance, but the direct financial implications. Gold of this age and provenance would command premium prices from collectors, museums, and historical societies. One chest alone might contain enough value to resolve their immediate financial crisis, but as he examined the remaining chests and cabinets, it became clear that the real treasure in this chamber wasn't simply monetary. The underground vault contained what appeared to be a carefully curated collection of artifacts, documenting a perspective on Civil War-era history that had gone largely unrecorded in official narratives. Journals from ordinary citizens, preserved correspondence between separated families, inventories of cultural artifacts rescued from advancing armies, and financial records documenting economic life beyond the simplified accounts in history textbooks. "This isn't just smuggled Confederate valuables," Maya explained, her academic understanding providing crucial context. "This is a deliberately preserved historical record created by people who believed their perspective would be erased from official histories. The gold was probably just to fund the operation and ensure the collection's maintenance after the war." Nathan was examining another document, this one more personally relevant. "Look at this, a deed transfer. It shows the property being purchased by someone named Jeremiah Carter in 1887. He looked up, meeting his sister's eyes with growing comprehension. "Our great-great-grandfather. Which means," Maya began, "Uncle Elijah might have known about this all along," Nathan finished. "The Carter family has been custodians of this collection for generations." As they carefully continued their exploration, taking photographs and notes without disturbing the original positions of artifacts, the implications became increasingly clear. They had stumbled upon a historical collection of immense value, both monetarily and academically. The gold alone would more than address their financial crisis, while the historical materials represented a scholarly treasure trove that would attract academic interest nationwide. What had begun as a desperate attempt to address termite damage to satisfy a county inspector had unexpectedly revealed a hidden family legacy connecting the Carters to a significant chapter of American history. The foreclosure notice that had dominated their mourning now seemed almost laughably inconsequential in the face of what lay beneath their feet. As they finally emerged from the underground chamber, carefully resealing the hidden entrance until they could develop a proper preservation plan, Nathan and Maya found themselves fundamentally transformed by the experience. The struggling farm that had seemed like an unwelcome burden just hours earlier now represented something far more significant, a generational trust that had been placed in their hands at precisely the moment they were in position to appreciate its true value. "We need to be strategic about this," Nathan said, as they secured the study door behind them. "Once word gets out, there will be all kinds of interest, not all of it with the preservation of history as the primary motivation." Maya nodded, her academic training providing structure to their next steps. "We document everything properly. First, then approach the State Historical Society with a formal discovery report. We need to establish proper provenance before making any public announcements. "And Miss Jenkins?" Nathan asked, recalling the town historian's unusual interest in the property boundaries and her pending visit the next morning. "We listen to what she knows first," Maya decided after consideration. Her research might provide important context for understanding the collection, but we don't reveal what we found until we've secured proper documentation and legal protections. Neither sibling could have possibly anticipated how this discovery would transform not just their financial circumstances, but their understanding of their family's place in American history. The quiet farmhouse that had seemed destined for foreclosure would soon become the focus of intense interest from historians, treasure hunters, and collectors across the country. What the Carters couldn't know as they carefully secured their extraordinary find was that they weren't the first to search for this hidden collection in recent times. Others had been pursuing rumors of the Heritage Coalition artifacts for decades, including powerful individuals who believed they had rightful claim to contents they had never seen but had dedicated their lives to locating. And Miss Jenkins's scheduled visit the next morning represented more than simple historical curiosity. It was the culmination of research that had consumed the elderly historian's professional life. Before the week ended, the struggling farm that had seemed destined for bank repossession would become the center of a complex legal and historical controversy that would test not only the siblings' resolve, but their understanding of what truly constitutes ownership of the past, all because Nathan had decided to address one more repair project before admitting defeat. The morning light filtered through the study's dusty curtains as Nathan and Maya prepared for Eleanor Jenkins' arrival. They had barely slept, spending most of the night cataloguing photographs of their discovery and researching the historical context of the Heritage Coalition mentioned in the underground chamber's documents. The financial crisis that had dominated their thoughts just 24 hours earlier now seemed almost trivial compared to the historical significance of what lay beneath the farmhouse floors. "How much do we tell her?" Maya asked, carefully arranging her field notes on the dining room table. They had agreed to meet with the town historian in the main house rather than the study to keep the hidden entrance concealed. Nathan considered the question carefully. His corporate background had taught him the value of strategic information sharing. "We listen first, find out what she knows about the property and why she's so interested in the boundary discrepancies. Then we decide." Duddy-doo. Distant sound of tires on gravel announced their visitor's arrival. Through the front window, they watched as an immaculately maintained vintage Volvo pulled up to the farmhouse. Eleanor Jenkins emerged with surprising agility for a woman in her 70s, retrieving a leather portfolio and what appeared to be rolled survey maps from her passenger seat. "I brought coffee and pastries," Maya said, setting out the modest refreshments they had prepared. Small-town hospitality might encourage her to be more forthcoming. Nathan nodded appreciation for his sister's insight. Despite the excitement of their discovery, they had maintained enough presence of mind to recognize that knowledge was leverage in what might become a complicated situation. The foreclosure notice still sat on the kitchen counter, a reminder that their immediate financial concerns remained unresolved despite the potential value of what they had found. A firm knock at the door ended further discussion. Nathan opened it to find Eleanor Jenkins looking remarkably professional in a tailored blazer that suggested her role as town historian wasn't merely a retirement hobby. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," she said, extending a hand in formal greeting. "I've been researching local property histories for my upcoming book on the region's development during Reconstruction. Your uncle's land presents some fascinating anomalies." Nathan guided her to the dining room where Maya had arranged their modest hospitality. After brief introductions and small talk about the challenges of renovating a historic property, Eleanor, opened her portfolio to reveal meticulously organized documents. The original land grant for this property dates to 1842, she began, displaying county records with professional efficiency. But what's curious is the boundary adjustment filed in 1887 when the property transferred to Jeremiah Carter. The revised survey increased the acreage by nearly 30% without any record of additional purchase. This aligned precisely with the date on the deed transfer document they had discovered in the underground chamber the previous evening. Nathan exchanged a meaningful glance with Maya before responding carefully. "We're still going through, Uncle. Elijah's papers. He wasn't particularly organized with his record-keeping." "Your uncle was more methodical than you might think," Eleanor replied, her tone suggesting personal knowledge rather than professional assessment. "I consulted with him several times over the years about local historical matters. He had quite an extensive knowledge of regional history for someone with no formal training." Maya leaned forward slightly. "Were you specifically interested in the boundary discrepancy when you consulted with him?" The question was direct enough to prompt a slight recalibration in Eleanor's approach. She studied Maya with new appreciation for her perception before answering. "Not initially. My research began with tracking the movement of artifacts from Wellspring Plantation when it was abandoned after the war. The historical record indicates significant cultural materials, artwork, documents, household items from one of the region's most prominent families disappeared rather than being confiscated by Union forces. Some historical accounts suggested they were moved through an underground network to protect them from destruction." Nathan maintained a neutral expression despite the direct relevance to what they had discovered. "And you think these artifacts might be connected to our property?" "I think your property played a significant role in what was called the Heritage Coalition's Preservation Network," Eleanor confirmed, producing a historical journal with highlighted passages. This contemporary account mentions a secure repository constructed in limestone caverns beneath homestead property approximately 12 miles northwest of Richmond Crossing. The geographical coordinates align almost precisely with your uncle's farm. The mention of limestone caverns caught both siblings' attention immediately. The underground chamber they had discovered showed signs of being partially incorporated into natural geological formations, explaining the unusual air circulation in what should have been a sealed space. "That's fascinating historical context," Maya acknowledged, her archaeological training allowing her to engage professionally while revealing nothing about their discovery. "But what's the connection to the boundary discrepancy?" Eleanor unrolled a topographical survey map, anchoring its corners with coffee mugs. The expanded boundary filed in 1887 specifically incorporated this limestone formation, a feature that would have been unusually valuable for a farming operation unless the underground spaces were being utilized for some purpose. The precision of Eleanor's research suggested she had been pursuing this historical thread for considerable time. Nathan decided to probe more directly for her underlying motivation. "Ms. Jenkins, this is clearly more than background research. For a general history book, may I ask why you're so specifically interested in our property?" For the first time, the historian's professional demeanor showed signs of personal investment. "My great-grandmother was Elizabeth Wellspring. Her family's artistic and cultural heritage disappeared during the chaos of war's end. I've spent 40 years tracking what happened to those materials, not just for their considerable monetary value, but because they represent a significant, largely undocumented perspective on our regional history." The revelation shifted the conversation's dynamics significantly. Eleanor wasn't merely a curious historian. She was potentially a claimant to at least some portion of what they had discovered if her family connection could be proven. The siblings exchanged another meaningful glance, silently deliberating how to proceed. Have you found documentary evidence that Wellspring materials specifically were transported here? Maya asked, her archaeological training evident in her precise questioning. Nothing conclusive, Eleanor admitted, but circumstantial evidence is substantial. The Heritage Coalition's documented activities align with this property's expansion. Your family purchased the farm shortly after the Coalition's operational period concluded, and most tellingly, the geological features incorporated in the boundary adjustment would be ideal for precisely the type of preservation facility described. In Coalition documents, Nathan considered their position carefully. They needed more information about potential legal claims before revealing their discovery, but recognized the value of Eleanor's extensive research in providing historical context they would otherwise spend months assembling. Ms. Jenkins, your research provides valuable historical background for understanding our property's past. We're still exploring the farmhouse and outbuildings, cataloguing what Uncle Elijah left behind. If we discover anything relevant to your research, we'll certainly let you know. It was neither a confirmation nor a denial, a non-committal response that maintained their options while acknowledging her expertise. Eleanor studied them both carefully, her decades of historical research having developed a sensitivity to unspoken revelations. I suspect, she said deliberately, that you've already found something significant. Your question patterns suggest specific rather than general interest in the Coalition's activities. Before either sibling could respond, the conversation was interrupted by the distinctive sound of vehicles approaching, multiple vehicles, judging by the growing volume. Nathan moved to the window, surprised to see 3 black SUVs with tinted windows pulling up behind Eleanor's Volvo. Men in casual but coordinated clothing emerged, their movements suggesting professional coordination rather than casual visitors. "Are you expecting company, Ms. Jenkins?" Nathan asked, tension evident in his voice. The historian appeared genuinely surprised, moving to join him at the window. "No, I came alone." Her expression hardened as she observed the new arrivals. "But I recognize that man, the one giving directions. That's Richard Wellspring, my second cousin. We haven't spoken in years due to disagreements about family history. Preservation." Maya joined them, her archaeological training immediately recognizing the systematic deployment of what appeared to be a professional site assessment team. "They're carrying ground-penetrating radar equipment. That's not standard for casual visitors." Nathan's protective instincts engaged immediately. "Ms. Jenkins, what exactly does your cousin do professionally?" "He runs Wellspring Heritage Recovery, a private company that locates and recovers lost historical artifacts for collectors and institutions," she replied, disapproval evident in her tone. "His methods have been criticized by academic historians and preservationists. He must have been monitoring my research." The implications were immediate and concerning. If Richard Wellspring had indeed been tracking Eleanor's historical investigation, their discovery was at risk of being appropriated by someone whose primary motivation appeared to be commercial rather than preservationist. "Maya, secure the study door," Nathan directed quietly. "Ms. Jenkins, I think we need to have a more direct conversation about what might be on our property and what legal protections might apply." As Maya moved quickly to lock and block the entrance to the study containing the hidden chamber access, Nathan watched Richard Wellspring organizing his team with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to taking control of situations. One man began setting up what appeared to be sophisticated scanning equipment, while 2 others consulted tablet displays showing what looked suspiciously like detailed property surveys. "They're preparing for a systematic site assessment," Eleanor observed with growing alarm. "Richard doesn't invest resources like this without substantial confidence in potential returns." Nathan's corporate crisis management experience engaged automatically. We need to establish clear boundaries immediately. This is private property, and they have no permission to conduct any kind of survey or exploration." As he moved toward the front door, Eleanor caught his arm. "Wait. Richard operates in legal grey areas, but he's careful about maintaining plausible legitimacy. There must be some pretense for this intrusion." The answer presented itself moments later when a fourth vehicle arrived. A county sheriff's patrol car. The officer who emerged conferred briefly with Richard before approaching the farmhouse door with official purpose. "What possible legal pretext could they have?" Maya asked, rejoining them after securing the study. "Unknown," Nathan replied tersely, "but we're about to find out." When the knock came, Nathan opened the door with deliberate calm, presenting the confident demeanor he had perfected during corporate negotiations rather than the anxiety he actually felt. "Officer, how can I help you?" he asked, maintaining a position that prevented easy visual access to the home's interior. "Deputy Collins, County Sheriff's Department," the officer introduced himself with professional detachment. "I'm here regarding a reported code violation. We received a complaint about unauthorized excavation on a historical property without proper permits." The fabricated nature of the complaint was immediately apparent. They had done no exterior excavation, and the hidden chamber had been accessed through the existing structure without any ground disturbance. This was clearly a pretext to gain access to the property. "There must be some mistake," Nathan replied calmly. "We've been renovating the interior of a private residence we inherited. No excavation has occurred." Deputy Collins appeared uncomfortable with his assignment, suggesting he was being used as an unwitting tool in Richard Wellspring's strategy. "Nevertheless, I'm required to investigate the complaint. Mr. Wellspring has been authorized by the County Historical Commission to assist in the assessment due to the property's historical significance." This was the leverage point Richard had manufactured, using the legitimacy of official historical preservation regulations as a means to access the property. Nathan recognized the tactic from corporate acquisition strategies. Find a regulatory angle that forces engagement on your terms. "I'm happy to show you around to confirm no excavation has occurred," Nathan offered reasonably. "But Mr. Wellspring and his team have no authority to enter private property regardless of their relationship with the Historical Commission." Before the deputy could respond, Richard Wellspring himself approached, projecting authoritative confidence. In his 50s, with an expensive haircut and casual clothing that nevertheless suggested significant wealth, he extended a hand that Nathan deliberately did not take. "Nathan Carter, I presume. Richard Wellspring, Historical Preservation Specialist. The Commission asked me to consult, given the potential historical significance of this site. We're simply here to ensure proper protocols are being followed for any discoveries of regional importance." Eleanor stepped forward, family tension immediately evident. "Richard, this transparent attempt to circumvent proper archaeological and historical procedures is precisely why the academic community has distanced itself from your commercial operations." Richard's expression registered momentary surprise at his cousin's presence before recovering his practiced professional demeanor. "Eleanor, still pursuing the family archives through academic channels, I see. How's that working out after 40 years of searching?" The personal history between the cousins created a charged atmosphere that Deputy Collins clearly found uncomfortable. "Folks, I'm just here to investigate a specific complaint about unauthorized excavation. I don't have any standing to mediate family or professional disagreements." Nathan seized the opportunity to establish control of the situation. "Deputy, I'm happy to show you the renovation work we've been doing to address code violations previously, identified by the county inspector. As you'll see, it's all standard interior repair work, Once you've confirmed there's no unauthorized excavation, I believe that addresses the specific complaint. This reasonable approach put the deputy in the position of either accepting the inspection offer or revealing that he was being used for purposes beyond his official duties. He nodded agreement, clearly wanting to complete his official responsibilities, without being drawn into whatever larger agenda was unfolding. That's acceptable. A visual confirmation should suffice. As Nathan prepared to escort the deputy on a carefully controlled tour that would avoid the study entirely, Richard Wellspring made his actual objective clear. While the deputy confirms there's no exterior excavation, perhaps we could discuss my team's interest in conducting a proper archaeological assessment. The Historical Commission is particularly interested in limestone formations on the property that might have been used during the Civil War era. The specific mention of limestone formations confirmed that Richard had indeed been monitoring Eleanor's research closely enough to know precisely what they were looking for. Maya stepped forward, her academic credentials becoming suddenly relevant. Any legitimate archaeological assessment would require proper permits, documentation, and supervision by qualified professionals, she stated firmly. As a doctoral candidate in historical archaeology, I'm familiar with the protocols. No legitimate historical commission would authorize private commercial entities to conduct assessments without property owner consent and academic oversight. Richard's expression revealed momentary reassessment of the siblings. He had clearly not anticipated encountering professional archaeological knowledge in what he had presumably expected to be naive property owners, easily intimidated by official-sounding authority. While Nathan led the deputy on a tour carefully, avoiding the study, Maya and Eleanor maintained a tense conversation with Richard in the front yard, well away from the farmhouse entrance. The historian used the opportunity to directly confront her cousin's methods. Your commercial approach to historical artifacts has done incalculable damage to proper contextual preservation, Eleanor stated, professional disapproval evident in every word. The Wellspring Collection's significance isn't merely in its monetary value, but in its complete historical narrative. Selling pieces to private collectors destroys that context forever. Richard's response revealed the fundamental philosophical division that had clearly separated the family for decades. History belongs to those willing to invest in its recovery and preservation. Academic institutions waste decades debating methodologies, while artifacts deteriorate and historical narratives remain incomplete. My clients provide the resources to recover what would otherwise remain lost. Maya recognized the argument as the classic tension between academic archaeology and commercial artifact recovery, a debate that had divided the field for generations. Recovery without proper documentation and contextual preservation destroys as much historical value as it salvages, she countered. Once an artifact is removed from its original context without proper documentation, significant portions of its historical significance are lost forever. Their philosophical debate was interrupted when Nathan returned with Deputy Collins, whose expression suggested he had confirmed the complaint was indeed unfounded. There's no evidence of any exterior excavation on the property, the deputy confirmed. Officially, the renovation work appears to be standard interior repairs, consistent with addressing previously documented code violations. Richard Wellspring maintained his professional composure despite this setback to his strategy. The Historical Commission's interest extends beyond current excavation to potential historical assets that should be properly documented. We'd be happy to provide that assessment service at no cost to the property owners. Nathan recognized the offer for what it was, an attempt to gain legitimate access to search for what Richard clearly believed was hidden on the property. "Thank you for your interest in our family home," he replied with deliberate emphasis on personal ownership. "If we decide professional historical assessment is needed, we'll work through proper academic and governmental channels." Deputy Collins, clearly recognizing he had been used as a pawn in whatever was unfolding, made his exit as quickly as professional courtesy allowed. Richard Wellspring, however, showed no intention of abandoning his objective. "Mr. Carter, I appreciate your caution, but I should mention that the Historical Commission has authority to compel assessment of potentially significant historical sites under certain circumstances. It would be unfortunate if formal proceedings became necessary." The threat was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. Richard had connections with regulatory authorities he was prepared to leverage. Nathan's corporate experience recognized the tactic. Immediately, create enough regulatory pressure to force a more favorable negotiation. Any such action would require substantial documentation and probable cause, Eleanor interjected, her decades of historical work having made her intimately familiar with preservation regulations. The burden of proof would fall on the Commission to demonstrate specific historical evidence rather than speculative interest. Richard smiled thinly at his cousin. "Evidence can be compelling when properly presented. Historical records indicate this property's connection to preservation activities during reconstruction, combined with ground-penetrating radar suggesting subsurface structural anomalies that might be sufficient for a judge to authorize a formal assessment." The mention of radar results was concerning. It suggested Richard's team had potentially conducted preliminary scans from adjacent property or public roadways, gathering just enough data to support regulatory intervention without technically trespassing. "If you've conducted unauthorized remote sensing of private property, that raises significant legal questions," Maya countered, her academic knowledge again proving unexpectedly valuable. "Archaeological assessment regulations specifically prohibit such activities without owner consent or court authorization." Nathan recognized they had reached a temporary stalemate. Richard Wellspring clearly believed valuable historical materials were hidden on the property and was prepared to use both official channels and borderline legal methods to access them. However, without definitive proof or legitimate authorization, his immediate options were limited. "We appreciate your historical interest in our family property," Nathan stated with finality. "If we discover anything of historical significance during our renovation, we'll ensure proper authorities are notified. For now, as the deputy has confirmed there's no violation occurring, I'll have to ask you and your team to leave private property." Richard maintained his professional demeanor despite the clear dismissal. "Of course, we respect private property rights, even when they might temporarily impede historical preservation." He handed Nathan a business card with elegant embossing. "When you're ready to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding what you've discovered, I'm available day or night." The presumptive statement that they had already made a discovery was clearly intended to provoke a reaction. Nathan maintained his composed expression, accepting the card without comment, as Richard's team reluctantly packed their equipment and prepared to depart. Eleanor approached the siblings with evident concern. Richard doesn't abandon objectives easily, especially when significant historical assets are involved. He'll pursue alternative approaches immediately. Once the Wellspring team had departed, the three returned to the farmhouse to assess their situation. The confrontation had fundamentally altered their circumstances. What had been an exciting personal discovery the previous evening had now become a contested historical asset with multiple potential claimants. "We need to understand the legal framework before proceeding further," Nathan stated practically, corporate training again providing structure to a complex situation. "Who legally owns historical artifacts discovered on private property? What obligations do property owners have regarding historical preservation?" What claims might descendants of original owners have on recovered materials? Eleanor's expertise proved immediately valuable. The legal framework is complicated, particularly for Civil War-era artifacts with potential cultural significance. Generally, artifacts discovered on private property belong to the property owner, but significant historical materials may be subject to preservation requirements that limit what you can do with them. Maya's archaeological training added important context. The ethical considerations are as important as the legal ones. These materials were clearly preserved with the specific intention of protecting them from destruction or appropriation. That original preservationist intent should be respected in how we approach this discovery. Nathan paced the room, mind working through practical next steps. We need expert consultation before proceeding further. Legal advice regarding our rights and obligations, archaeological expertise to ensure proper documentation and preservation, security measures to protect the site while we determine appropriate actions. I have colleagues at the State University's Archaeology Department who could provide confidential assessment, Maya offered. People I trust academically and ethically who wouldn't leak information to commercial operations like Richard's. Eleanor hesitated before making her own suggestion. I should disclose my personal interest more completely. As a Wellspring descendant, I might have familial claims to specific artifacts if they indeed came from Wellspring plantation. However, my primary concern has always been proper historical preservation rather than personal ownership. Her transparency prompted Nathan to make a decision. Ms. Jenkins, your research clearly helped you identify this property's historical significance. Long before we stumbled upon concrete evidence, that intellectual contribution deserves recognition in whatever process we develop. I propose we form a proper research partnership. Your historical expertise, Maya's archaeological training, and our property ownership combining to ensure these materials are handled appropriately. The proposed collaboration represented a reasonable middle path between competing interests, acknowledging Eleanor's legitimate research claims and family connection while maintaining the Carters' property rights and ensuring proper archaeological standards would be applied. That's a generous and ethically sound approach, Eleanor acknowledged. But you should understand that Richard will pursue his objectives through whatever channels he can influence. He has substantial financial resources and connections with private collectors who would pay extraordinary sums for Civil War artifacts, particularly those with connections to prominent Southern families. Which means our next actions are time-sensitive, Maya concluded. We need proper documentation and potential legal protections in place before Richard escalates his approach. As they discussed specific next steps, a new complication emerged. When Maya checked her phone, this is concerning. Richard Wellspring just announced on social media that his company is excited to be consulting on a significant historical discovery in Jefferson County. He's generating public interest without providing specific location details. Nathan immediately recognized the strategy. He's creating public pressure for transparency while establishing his company's perceived authority in the matter. Classic corporate positioning to strengthen negotiating leverage. We need to control the narrative before it controls us, Eleanor advised, her decades navigating historical academic politics evident in her assessment. A limited disclosure to proper authorities would establish legitimate oversight while preventing Richard from positioning himself as the primary expert. The conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of a vehicle approaching, another unexpected visitor arriving at the increasingly busy farmhouse. Through the window, they observed a modest sedan parking beside Eleanor's Volvo. The man who emerged was in his mid-30s, dressed in casual professional attire with a messenger bag slung across his shoulder. That's Daniel Harrison from the State Historical Preservation Office, Eleanor identified with surprise. He's the regional director for archaeological assessment. Richard must have contacted him directly. This development significantly accelerated their timeline for decision-making. Before a state official became directly involved, they needed clarity on their legal position and obligations. Ms. Jenkins, would you be willing to engage with Director Harrison initially? Nathan requested. Your professional standing and research. Credibility would help establish that we're approaching this responsibly. It would give us a few minutes to consider our immediate disclosure strategy. Eleanor agreed, moving to intercept the state official before he reached the house. Through the window, the siblings watched her engage in what appeared to be a collegial professional greeting, suggesting previous acquaintance. We need to make an immediate decision about disclosure, Nathan said urgently. A state historical preservation official on site changes the dynamics considerably. Maya considered their options with the analytical approach her academic training had developed. Technically, we haven't done anything improper. We discovered a hidden chamber during legitimate renovation work and have taken initial steps to document it properly. We haven't removed artifacts or disturbed the site beyond initial discovery access. But failure to promptly report a significant historical discovery could potentially violate preservation regulations, Nathan countered, considering worst-case scenarios. We need to demonstrate good faith while protecting our interests. After a moment's consideration, Maya proposed a measured approach. We disclose the discovery of the hidden chamber and some general details about its contents. We express our commitment to proper preservation and documentation. We request official guidance on next steps, while making clear our intention to ensure these materials receive proper academic study rather than commercial exploitation. Nathan nodded agreement. That establishes our good faith while maintaining some control over the process. We should also directly address the Wellspring team's appearance and make clear that we haven't authorized any commercial artifact recovery operation. As Eleanor guided Director Harrison toward the house, the siblings prepared to navigate what had evolved from an exciting personal discovery into a complex historical preservation case with competing interests and unclear legal frameworks. What happened next would potentially determine not just their financial future, but the historical legacy of materials that had been carefully preserved for generations. All because Nathan had decided to address termite damage in his eccentric uncle's study floor. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the farmhouse as Nathan and Maya prepared to meet with Director Harrison of the State Historical Preservation Office. Eleanor had bought them precious minutes by giving the official a brief overview of her own research into the property's historical significance, carefully framing the narrative around academic interest rather than commercial exploitation. Director Harrison is well respected in preservation circles, Maya whispered as they watched through the window. He's published several papers on ethical approaches to private property discoveries. If we're going to have a state official involved, he's probably our best option. Nathan nodded, finding unexpected reassurance in his sister's academic connections. His corporate experience had taught him the value of identifying potential allies within regulatory frameworks. Let's meet him in the dining room, he decided. Neutral territory away from the study. When Eleanor finally escorted Daniel Harrison into the house, his demeanor suggested professional interest rather than regulatory enforcement. In his mid-30s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a messenger bag worn across his rumpled button-down shirt, he projected academic authenticity rather than bureaucratic authority. Mr. Carter, Ms. Carter, he greeted them with a firm handshake. Dr. Jenkins has given me some historical context about your property. I understand you've discovered something of potential historical significance during renovation work. The deliberate neutrality of his phrasing suggested he was carefully avoiding presumptions about what they had found. Nathan appreciated this. professional restraint, especially in contrast to Richard Wellspring's presumptive approach. "Thank you for coming, Director Harrison," Nathan replied, guiding him to the dining room where they had prepared coffee and laid out some of Uncle Elijah's historical books about the region. Establishing their own legitimate interest in local life history, we're in somewhat uncharted territory and could use some expert guidance. Once they were seated, Maya took the lead, her archaeological training providing credibility to their account. During routine repair work addressing termite damage, we discovered a hidden chamber beneath the study floor. The space appears to be a historically significant storage facility dating to the Reconstruction era, containing documents and artifacts that may be connected to what historical records call the Heritage Coalition. Harrison's expression revealed genuine academic interest rather than mere professional obligation. The Heritage Coalition has been something of a historical phantom, documented in contemporary accounts, but with few concrete artifacts ever discovered. Most academic historians consider their preservation activities to be more legend than fact. It appears the legends had substance. Eleanor contributed, sliding across the table the photographs they had taken of the journal found in the metal box. These documents suggest a coordinated effort to preserve cultural and historical materials from potential destruction during the chaotic period following the Civil War. The director examined the photographs with evident professional excitement before tempering his reaction with official composure. This would indeed represent a significant historical discovery. I should note that my office's primary concern is ensuring proper documentation and preservation, rather than determining ownership or controlling access. Our regulatory authority is focused on preventing destruction or improper removal of historically significant materials. This clarification of his role immediately eased some of Nathan's concerns about potential government intervention. "We're committed to proper preservation," he assured the director. "Our uncertainty relates to appropriate next steps that balance historical preservation with private property rights." Harrison nodded, understanding. That's a common tension in historical discoveries. Generally speaking, artifacts discovered on private property belong to the property owner, though significant discoveries may trigger preservation requirements that limit certain actions, like selling across state lines or exporting internationally. Maya leaned forward with the direct approach her academic training encouraged. "Director Harrison, we should mention that before your arrival, we had an unexpected visit from Richard Wellspring and a team claiming authorization from the County Historical Commission to conduct assessments of our property. They attempted to use a county sheriff's deputy to gain access under the pretext of investigating code violations." The official's expression darkened slightly. Mr. Wellspring's company operates in what most academic preservationists consider ethical gray areas. While technically legal in most cases, their commercial focus often prioritizes artifact recovery over contextual preservation. They have no authority to conduct assessments on private property without owner consent, regardless of any consulting relationship with local historical commissions. This confirmation of Richard's overreach validated their earlier resistance. Eleanor added important context. "Richard and I have a complicated family history. We're both Wellspring descendants, but with fundamentally different approaches to historical preservation. He believes our family's historical materials should be recovered by whatever means necessary, while I've advocated for proper academic documentation that maintains historical context." Harrison processed this information thoughtfully. Family connections to historical materials add another layer of complexity. While not typically creating legal ownership claims, they do represent important stakeholder interests that ethical preservation approaches should consider. Nathan appreciated the director's balanced perspective, It validated their instinct to form a collaborative approach rather than staking absolute ownership claims based solely on property rights. Given these complexities, what would you recommend as appropriate next steps? The director set his coffee cup down deliberately. Based on what you've described, I would recommend a phased approach. First, formal documentation of the discovery. With my office, which establishes an official record without triggering immediate public disclosure requirements. Second, assembly of a qualified assessment team with appropriate expertise and ethical standards. Third, development of a preservation plan that addresses scholarly access, physical conservation, and potential public education components. This methodical framework aligned perfectly with the Carter's desire for a measured approach that prioritized proper preservation over hasty exploitation. Maya's archaeological training had suggested similar steps, but having them validated by an official preservation authority provided welcome reassurance. Before proceeding further, Harrison continued, I should ask whether you're comfortable showing me the actual discovery. Visual assessment would help me provide more specific guidance regarding appropriate preservation measures. The siblings exchanged glances, silently deliberating. Showing the chamber would surrender some control over the narrative, but would also demonstrate their commitment to proper procedures. After a moment's consideration, Nathan nodded agreement. We'd appreciate your expert assessment, he confirmed. We've been careful not to disturb the materials beyond initial documentation. As they moved toward the study, Harrison noted the renovation work visible throughout the house. Maintaining historic properties while addressing modern structural requirements is always challenging. Your repairs show attention to preserving original elements where possible. Nathan appreciated the recognition of their efforts. Financial constraints have forced prioritization. The termite damage in the study floor was addressed first because it represented potential structural compromise. In the study, Maya carefully demonstrated how they had discovered the hidden mechanism in the fireplace stonework. The director observed with professional interest, taking notes on the clever engineering that had concealed the entrance for generations. The counterweight system is remarkably sophisticated for the period, he observed. Suggests professional engineering knowledge rather than amateur construction. As they prepared to access the hidden chamber, Nathan established clear expectations. We'll show you the chamber and its contents, but we'd like your agreement that nothing will be removed during this initial assessment. Absolutely, Harrison confirmed. Premature removal of artifacts without proper documentation would violate basic preservation protocols. Today's visit is purely for initial assessment and guidance. Maya activated the stone mechanism, revealing the narrow stairway descending into darkness. Equipped with proper lighting, the group carefully made their way down the stone steps into the underground chamber. Harrison's professional composure momentarily faltered as his light revealed the untouched historical collection. This is, he began, academic vocabulary temporarily failing him before recovering his professional demeanor. This represents an unprecedented level of preservation. Most Civil War-era collections have been dispersed, damaged, or removed from original context. To find an intact, deliberately preserved collection in its original storage facility is extraordinary. For the next hour, Harrison conducted a methodical initial assessment, carefully documenting key elements without disturbing the original positions of artifacts. His expertise provided valuable insights into the historical significance of what they had discovered. Based on these ledgers, this appears to be a coordinated preservation effort by a network of families concerned about cultural erasure during Reconstruction, he explained, carefully examining documents without removing them from their original locations. The contemporary historical narrative often overlooks these perspective preservation efforts by focusing solely on military and political dimensions of the period. Eleanor's historical research provided important contextual understanding. The Wellspring family chronicles mention collaborative efforts with neighboring families to protect cultural materials from potential destruction. Contemporary letters describe fears that family histories would be deliberately erased by what they termed victor's justice, regardless of their historical significance. As they examined the chamber more thoroughly, Harrison identified specific elements of extraordinary significance. These financial records document economic transitions during early Reconstruction that aren't represented in existing historical collections. The agricultural adaptation strategies documented here would significantly enhance our understanding of how Southern agricultural systems transformed after emancipation. The gold coins Nathan had initially seen as primarily financial salvation were contextualized by the director as historical artifacts in their own right. Spanish colonial currency circulated as legal tender throughout the region until standardized national currency was fully implemented. These coins represent the transition period between regional and national economic systems. After completing his initial assessment, Harrison led them back upstairs to discuss implications and next steps. His professional excitement was evident, despite his efforts to maintain official objectivity. "Let me be clear about the significance of what you've discovered," he began once they were seated in the dining room again. "This isn't merely a collection of valuable historical artifacts. It's an intact, deliberately preserved historical record that offers perspectives largely absent from conventional historical narratives about Reconstruction. The academic value transcends the considerable monetary worth of individual items." Nathan appreciated the director's holistic perspective. It aligned with their growing sense that they had discovered something more significant than merely valuable objects. Given that assessment, what specific next steps would you recommend? Harrison organized his thoughts with academic precision. "First, I'll prepare formal documentation establishing the discovery in official records, which triggers certain preservation protections without requiring public disclosure at this stage. Second, I recommend assembling a specialized documentation team. Archaeologists, historians, and conservation specialists appropriate for the specific materials discovered. Third, implementing basic security measures to protect the site while a comprehensive preservation plan is developed." "And what about competing claims?" Maya asked practically, addressing the elephant in the room. Richard Wellspring has already started positioning himself publicly as connected to this discovery. The director's expression suggested this wasn't an unexpected complication. Commercial interests often attempt to establish perceived authority through public positioning. The formal documentation I'm proposing establishes an official record that preempts unauthorized claims. My office can issue a statement confirming an unnamed historical discovery is under proper preservation protocols without providing specific details that might compromise site security. This balanced approach addressed both their need for official protection and their desire to maintain some control over public disclosure timing. Eleanor raised another practical concern. "The Carters' immediate financial situation presents complications," she noted delicately. "The property faces potential foreclosure within 30 days due to tax obligations and necessary repairs. While historical preservation is the primary concern, practical considerations cannot be ignored." Harrison acknowledged this reality with pragmatic understanding rather than academic dismissal. This tension between preservation needs and property owner financial realities is unfortunately common. There are several potential approaches. Emergency preservation grants could address immediate stabilization needs. Documentation of historical significance might qualify the property for tax abatement programs, and in some cases, controlled deaccession of specific non-contextual artifacts might be ethically appropriate if essential to preserving the collection's integrity as a whole. The potential financial pathways provided Nathan with concrete options rather than merely philosophical reassurance. His business mind immediately began calculating potential timelines against their 30-day foreclosure deadline. How quickly could these processes be implemented? He asked practically. Emergency preservation designation could be processed within 7–10 days, given the clear historical significance, Harrison replied with refreshing directness. Tax abatement applications typically take 2 to 3 weeks for preliminary approval. Grant disbursements unfortunately operate on longer timelines, typically 30–45 days minimum. This candid assessment highlighted the misalignment between bureaucratic processes and their immediate financial deadline. Nathan processed this reality while considering alternatives. Would it be appropriate to approach academic institutions about potential research partnerships that might include financial support for preservation infrastructure? He asked, drawing on his corporate experience with joint ventures. The director nodded approvingly. That's actually an excellent approach. Several university historical departments maintain rapid response funding for exactly these situations, preserving discoveries that might otherwise be compromised by financial pressures. These arrangements typically include property owner compensation as part of research access agreements while ensuring proper preservation standards. Maya immediately thought of her academic connections. My doctoral advisor at the State University has specifically mentioned such programs. The archaeology department maintains emergency preservation funding for time-sensitive discoveries. Harrison's expression suggested genuine relief at this potential solution. University partnerships often provide the most balanced approach to private property discoveries, respecting owner rights while ensuring academic rigor in documentation and preservation. They can typically deploy resources more quickly than government agencies bound by procurement regulations. As they discussed specific approaches to university partnerships, a distinctive sound interrupted their conversation. Vehicle tires on. Gravel approaching the farmhouse. Through the window, they observed a local news van pulling up behind the various vehicles already parked in the farm's drive. That's concerning, Nathan observed. We haven't made any public statements about the discovery. Richard Wellspring's social media announcement must have generated local media interest, Eleanor concluded with evident frustration. He's forcing disclosure timeline acceleration to maintain his perceived connection to the discovery. Harrison immediately shifted to crisis management mode. This is unfortunately common with significant discoveries. I can intercept the media representative as a state preservation official and provide limited information that protects site details while confirming proper protocols are being followed. Nathan appreciated the director's willingness to manage this unexpected complication. That would be helpful. We're not prepared for detailed public disclosure before establishing proper preservation measures. As Harrison moved toward the door, Maya had a sudden realization. Wait, this might actually help with our emergency timeline. Media coverage establishing the historical significance could accelerate university interest in partnerships and potentially leverage faster response from tax authorities regarding abatement applications. Nathan recognized the strategic potential in his sister's assessment. His corporate experience had taught him that controlled media engagement could create beneficial pressure on institutional processes that might otherwise move too slowly for their needs. If we provide limited but compelling information about the historical significance while emphasizing proper preservation approaches, it could actually serve our objectives, he concurred. Director Harrison, Would you be comfortable facilitating a carefully structured disclosure that emphasizes preservation while establishing the discovery's legitimate historical importance? The director considered this approach with professional assessment. A limited disclosure, emphasizing proper preservation protocols, could indeed help establish legitimate historical significance while discouraging inappropriate commercial exploitation attempts. It would need to emphasize that the site is under official preservation oversight without revealing specific security compromising details. Eleanor added another dimension to the strategy. Establishing public awareness of the discovery's connection to regional historical narratives could also generate community support for preservation rather than commercial exploitation. Public sentiment can be powerful in protecting historically significant sites. With agreement on a controlled disclosure approach, Harrison prepared to engage with the media representative, while the Carters and Eleanor quickly developed key messages emphasizing historical significance, proper preservation, protocols, and the site's connection to regional heritage. The narrative they constructed deliberately highlighted the contextual historical value of the collection rather than potential monetary worth of individual artifacts. When Harrison returned from his initial conversation with the reporter, his expression suggested measured success. She's agreed to a structured interview approach, focusing on historical significance and proper preservation rather than sensationalized treasure discovery framing. I've established that the site is under official preservation oversight without confirming specific details about artifacts discovered. The subsequent interview, conducted with Director Harrison as the primary expert spokesperson, supplemented by Eleanor's historical research context and Maya's archaeological expertise, successfully established a public narrative that emphasized scholarly significance over commercial value. Nathan strategically remained in a supporting role, reinforcing their commitment to proper preservation while acknowledging the family's unexpected connection to regional history through their inherited property. As the reporter departed with what her enthusiastic reaction suggested would be a feature story, rather than merely a brief news segment, the group reassembled in the dining room to assess their significantly altered situation. That went as well as could be expected under the circumstances, Harrison observed. The narrative emphasis on scholarly significance rather than monetary value should help discourage treasure hunting interest while potentially accelerating academic preservation support. Nathan's practical mind turned immediately to next steps. We need to secure the site properly while these various processes unfold. The media coverage, while strategically useful, also creates security vulnerabilities. My office can authorize emergency security measures as part of the initial preservation protocol, Harrison assured them. Basic monitoring systems and temporary barriers can be implemented within 24-48 hours through our emergency preservation contractors. Maya had been exchanging text messages with her academic advisor during the media interaction and now had promising news. My advisor is extraordinarily interested in the discovery. She's offered to bring a preliminary university assessment team tomorrow morning and can initiate emergency preservation funding discussions immediately. The department apparently has dedicated funding for precisely these situations where significant discoveries face potential compromise due to financial constraints. This rapid response from academic channels suggested their 30-day foreclosure deadline might be addressable through university partnership rather than relying solely on slower governmental processes. Eleanor contributed another important development. While you were speaking with the reporter, I received an email response from the State Historical Society. They've expressed interest in providing a matching grant for any university preservation funding, potentially creating a combined resource pool sufficient to address both immediate security needs and longer-term documentation requirements. The Convergence of these potential resources transformed what had seemed an insurmountable financial crisis just 24 hours earlier. While specific dollar amounts remained undefined, the expressions of institutional interest suggested pathways to address their immediate financial obligations while ensuring proper historical preservation. It seems we've transitioned from financial crisis to unexpected preservation partners in the span of a single day, Nathan observed with measured optimism. Though we should remain cautious about counting on institutional funding until formal agreements are established. Harrison nodded agreement with this prudent assessment. Institutional processes have their own timelines, but discoveries of this significance tend to accelerate standard protocols. The key is maintaining site security and proper documentation standards while these arrangements develop. As the director prepared to depart with promises to initiate formal documentation immediately, the farmhouse landline rang unexpectedly. Nathan answered with cautious formality, unsurprised to hear Richard Wellspring's carefully modulated voice. "Mr. Carter, I understand you've been working with the State Preservation Office regarding your discovery. I'd like to propose a private conversation about potential collaboration that would address your immediate financial concerns while ensuring appropriate handling of historically significant materials." The timing of the call, immediately following media departure, suggested Richard had been monitoring developments closely. Nathan maintained professional composure while activating his phone's speaker function so others could hear the conversation. "Mr. Wellspring, we appreciate your interest, but we're pursuing appropriate preservation pathways through official channels and academic partnerships. Director Harrison from the State Preservation Office has been providing excellent guidance." Richard's response carried the practiced reasonableness of someone accustomed to negotiating reluctant partners. Government processes and academic partnerships have notoriously lengthy timelines, Mr. Carter. Your 30-day foreclosure deadline may not align with their institutional capabilities. My company can provide immediate financial resolution while ensuring proper handling of historical materials. The direct reference to their specific financial deadline confirmed that Richard had indeed been gathering detailed intelligence about their situation. Nathan maintained his composed rejection. "We're satisfied with the preservation and partnership approaches currently developing, but thank you for your interest." After ending the call, Nathan turned to the others with pragmatic assessment. He'll continue pursuing acquisition through whatever channels he can influence. His reference to our specific financial timeline suggests he has sources within county tax offices or banking institutions. Harrison wasn't surprised by this development. Commercial operators in historical recovery frequently cultivate information sources within regulatory offices. It's unfortunately common practice. However, once formal preservation documentation is filed, certain acquisition approaches become legally problematic, creating additional protections against aggressive commercial tactics. As evening approached and the director finally departed with promises of immediate official documentation, the Carters and Eleanor found themselves in a transformed situation. What had begun as a desperate attempt to address termite damage before foreclosure had evolved into a historically significant discovery with developing academic and institutional support. "I should return to my research archives," Eleanor announced as she gathered her materials. "There may be additional historical context that could help guide proper documentation approaches for the specific artifact types discovered." Before departing, she paused to address something that had clearly been on her mind throughout the day's developments. "I want to be transparent about my family connection to potentially some of these materials. While I believe proper historical preservation transcends family ownership claims, I do have personal interest in ensuring the Wellspring family historical narrative is properly documented. I hope that doesn't create conflict in our developing partnership. Nathan appreciated her continued transparency. Your research expertise and historical context knowledge are invaluable components of proper preservation. Family connection provides important perspective rather than creating conflicts. As long as we maintain shared commitment to proper historical documentation rather than ownership disputes. After Eleanor's departure, the siblings found themselves alone in the suddenly quiet farmhouse, processing the extraordinary developments of the past 24 hours. From financial crisis facing imminent foreclosure to discovering historically significant materials that were generating institutional support and media interest, their circumstances had transformed in ways neither could have anticipated. "Uncle, Elijah must have known," Maya said quietly, as they sat at the kitchen table where the foreclosure notice still lay amid scattered renovation estimates. His eccentric interest in local history, the unusual books in his study, his reluctance to allow anyone access to certain parts of the house. He was protecting the secret his family had maintained for generations. Nathan nodded, recalling childhood visits when their uncle had seemed overly protective of his privacy, particularly regarding the study where they had ultimately made their discovery. The question is whether he knew specifically what was hidden, or just that something important was there to be protected. As darkness fell on the old farmhouse, they found themselves transitioning from crisis management to contemplation of their unexpected connection to regional history. The farm, that had seemed a financial burden just days earlier, now represented a legacy of historical preservation extending back generations. Their family had, knowingly or unknowingly, served as custodians of materials that offered unique perspectives on a turbulent historical period. "What do you think happens now?" Maya asked as they watched the sun set over fields that suddenly seemed less like failed agricultural investments and more like protective covering for historical secrets. "In the immediate term, we secure proper preservation support to address our financial obligations," Nathan replied practically. "Longer term, we become part of something much larger than renovating an inherited farmhouse. We become contributors to historical understanding rather than just property owners facing foreclosure." As night settled over the farm that had been in their family for generations, Nathan reflected on the strange series of events that had transformed their inheritance from burden to blessing. The termite damage that had seemed like one more financial drain had instead revealed a hidden chamber that might not only save their property, but connect them to a historical legacy they never knew they carried. What neither sibling could possibly anticipate as they finally sought rest after their extraordinary day was how this discovery would eventually transform not just their own financial circumstances, but the regional understanding of Reconstruction-era history. The preservation partnership developing around their accidental discovery would ultimately create one of the most significant public history resources in the state. All because Nathan had decided to address termite damage in his uncle's study, flaw before admitting defeat to impending foreclosure. In the months that followed, the carefully documented collection would reveal perspectives on post-Civil War reconciliation efforts that challenged conventional historical narratives. The meticulous records preserved in that underground chamber would provide unprecedented insights into how families navigated the complex transition from wartime to Reconstruction, offering nuanced understanding beyond the simplified accounts found in history textbooks. And the Carter family farm, once facing imminent foreclosure, would become nationally recognized as a historical preservation site where visitors could glimpse perspectives on American history that had been deliberately preserved by those who feared their experiences might otherwise be erased from historical memory. The foreclosure notice that had once symbolized failure was eventually framed and displayed, as the first artifact in a museum explaining how financial crisis led to historical revelation, all because termites had damaged the floor above a chamber, filled with carefully preserved historical treasures. 2 years had passed since Nathan and Maya Carter had discovered the hidden chamber beneath their uncle's study. The farmhouse that had once faced imminent foreclosure now stood fully restored, its weathered exterior maintained with historical authenticity, while modern systems had been discreetly integrated to support its new purpose. What had begun as a desperate renovation project had transformed into the Carter Heritage Center, a nationally recognized historical preservation site drawing scholars, tourists, and history enthusiasts from across the country. On a crisp autumn morning, Nathan stood on the front porch, watching a group of university students being guided through the property by Maya, whose doctoral research had evolved to focus specifically on the preservation methods employed by the Heritage Coalition. Her academic career had flourished alongside the site's development, with her expertise in Civil War-era preservation techniques now sought by museums and universities nationwide. "They seem particularly engaged today," observed Eleanor Jenkins, who had joined him on the porch. Now serving as the center's historical director, she had developed educational programs that used the site's unique artifacts to present perspectives on Reconstruction-era history rarely found in conventional textbooks. Maya mentioned their doctoral candidates specializing in economic transitions during Reconstruction, Nathan replied. "The financial ledgers from the chamber have apparently challenged several established theories about how agricultural communities adapted after emancipation." Eleanor nodded with academic satisfaction. "That's precisely what makes this collection so extraordinary. It documents everyday adaptations and compromises that official histories often overlook in favor of political narratives. These students are seeing history through the eyes of those who lived it, rather than those who merely recorded it afterward." The transformation of their inheritance from financial burden to historical treasure had unfolded with remarkable speed after their initial discovery. The university partnership Maya had initiated had quickly expanded to include multiple academic institutions, creating a collaborative approach that provided both financial stability and scholarly integrity to the preservation effort. The emergency preservation designation Harrison had facilitated had temporarily halted the foreclosure process, giving them crucial time to develop a sustainable operational model. Within 6 months, a formal preservation trust had been established, with the Carter family retaining ownership of the property, while conservation easements ensured permanent protection of its historical significance. What had surprised Nathan most was how the discovery had transformed his own professional trajectory. His corporate background in strategic planning had proven unexpectedly valuable in developing the center's operational framework. Rather than returning to the technology sector, he had found himself applying business principles to historical preservation, developing innovative funding approaches that balanced scholarly access with financial sustainability. "The advisory board meeting begins in 20 minutes, Eleanor reminded him, interrupting his reflections. "Director Harrison mentioned they have important updates on the expansion proposal." The center's advisory board, comprising preservation officials, academic partners, and community representatives, had been discussing the potential acquisition of adjacent properties to create a more comprehensive historical interpretation site. The massive public interest generated by their discovery had created opportunities that extended far beyond the original farmhouse. "I'll be there shortly," Nathan assured her, taking a final moment to appreciate how dramatically their circumstances had changed. The quarterly advisory board meetings were held in what had once been Uncle Elijah's study, the room where their extraordinary journey had begun. Now transformed into a conference space while maintaining its historical character, it served as the administrative heart of the center. The hidden entrance to the underground chamber remained in its original location, though now professionally secured and climate-controlled to ensure proper artifact preservation. As board members assembled around the oak table that had replaced Elijah's cluttered desk, Nathan noted the diverse expertise they had attracted to the project. University department chairs sat alongside preservation officials, museum curators, and community historians, all united by commitment to the center's unique approach to historical interpretation. Director Harrison called the meeting to order with his usual efficiency. Before addressing the expansion proposal, I'd like to recognize the center's second anniversary with some perspective on what's been accomplished. In just 24 months, the Carter Heritage Center has catalogued over 3,000 unique artifacts, published 12 academic papers challenging conventional reconstruction narratives, and welcomed more than 50,000 visitors. By any measure, it represents one of the most successful preservation initiatives in the state's history. The board members acknowledged this achievement with appropriate appreciation. But Nathan knew they were primarily focused on future development rather than past successes. His business experience had taught him that sustainability required constant evolution rather than resting on established accomplishments. The expansion proposal has progressed significantly, Harrison continued, turning to the primary agenda item. State funding has been secured for acquisition of the Anderson property adjoining the original Carter farm. Archaeological assessment confirms the presence of original outbuildings that align with structures documented in the Heritage Coalition materials. This development represented a significant expansion of the center's physical footprint, allowing for more comprehensive interpretation of the historical landscape. The Anderson property, once part of the original 19th century farm boundaries, would reconnect land parcels that had been separated over generations. The University Consortium has committed matching funds for restoration and interpretation, added Dr. Keller, the archaeological department chair who had been among the first academic partners to support the center's development. Graduate programs from 3 universities have already proposed research initiatives focused on the expanded property. As the discussion continued, addressing practical implementation questions and timeline coordination, Nathan found himself reflecting on how dramatically their lives had changed since that desperate day when the foreclosure notice had seemed to signal the end of their family's connection to the property. What had begun as financial crisis had evolved into an unexpected vocation that connected them to their family's history in ways they could never have anticipated. The transformation hadn't been without complications. Richard Wellspring had initially pursued aggressive legal challenges to their preservation approach, claiming familial rights to specific artifacts through his Wellspring heritage. The courts had ultimately rejected his claims, ruling that the Preservation Trust's academic focus and public access policies better honored the original preservationists' intentions than private acquisition would have. Ironically, the public, attention generated by Richard's legal challenges, had only increased interest in the center's work, bringing additional funding and scholarly engagement. His commercial approach had been overwhelmingly rejected in favor of the Carter's collaborative preservation model, forcing him to eventually abandon his acquisition attempts. As the meeting proceeded to financial updates, Nathan was pleased to see the center's sustainable model continuing to develop. What had begun as emergency financial support had evolved into a diversified funding approach, combining admission fees, research grants, educational programming, and endowment income. The center now generated sufficient revenue to fund ongoing operations while building reserves for future development. The special exhibition on economic adaptation during reconstruction has exceeded attendance projections by 30%, reported the center's financial director. The university partnership has also generated 4 new research grants, totaling $350,000 for the coming fiscal year. These numbers represented not just financial stability, but validation of their approach to historical interpretation. The materials preserved in that hidden chamber had proven valuable not merely as artifacts, but as perspectives on a historical period, often flattened into simplistic narratives. After the meeting concluded, Nathan found himself drawn back to the hidden chamber entrance, the stone hearth mechanism that had changed everything. Though the collection had been carefully catalogued and much of it moved to proper conservation facilities, the chamber itself remained as a symbolic heart of the center, with key artifacts maintained in their original contexts to demonstrate how intentionally they had been preserved. Maya joined him as he stood contemplating the fireplace that had concealed such extraordinary secrets. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, the completion of her doctoral work having added new confidence to her academic presence. "Just appreciating how different things turned out from what we expected," he replied. 2 years ago today, we were facing foreclosure with no apparent options. Now we're planning property expansions and managing research partnerships," she nodded, understanding. "And I was considering abandoning my graduate studies to find something more practical. Now my dissertation on the Heritage Coalition's preservation methodologies is being published by the university press." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a school group, 5th-grade students from the local elementary school participating in the center's educational programming. Their excited voices filled the hallway as their teacher prepared them to learn about secret history from the underground room. Maya smiled at their enthusiasm. They're always most excited about the hidden entrance mechanism. The idea of secret rooms and preserved treasures captures their imagination in ways conventional history lessons rarely manage. Nathan watched as the education coordinator demonstrated the stone mechanism, carefully modified now for safer operation while maintaining its historical engineering. The children's gasps of wonder as the hidden entrance was revealed reminded him of their own amazement that first evening, the moment when their understanding of their family's connection to the property had fundamentally transformed. "Mr. Carter, is it true your uncle knew about the secret room his whole life but never told anyone?" asked one particularly engaged student who had clearly been reading the center's promotional materials. Nathan appreciated the question's perceptiveness. "We believe he knew something important was hidden here, though he might not have known exactly what it contained. He protected the property throughout his life, maintaining the farm even when it wasn't financially successful. In retrospect, we think he saw himself as a guardian of something significant, even if he didn't fully understand what he was protecting." This interpretation of Uncle Elijah's seemingly eccentric behavior had emerged gradually as they had learned more about the family's connection to the Heritage Coalition. Documents in the chamber had revealed that each generation of Carters had been entrusted with protecting the property, though the specific knowledge of what lay beneath the study floor appeared to have become less detailed over time. As the students continued their tour into the chamber itself, Maya and Nathan moved to the visitors' center that had been established in what had once been the farm's equipment barn. Professionally designed exhibits now explained the historical context of the Heritage Coalition's preservation efforts, presenting multiple perspectives on Reconstruction-era conflicts over historical memory and cultural preservation. Director Harrison mentioned the Smithsonian has requested several artifacts for their special exhibition on contested memories, Civil War legacies, Maya noted as they examined the current display. Its extraordinary recognition for the collection's national significance. The evolution of their discovery, from personal inheritance to nationally recognized historical resource, had happened with remarkable speed. Academic interest had quickly elevated the collection's status, with multiple prestigious institutions now partnering with the Center for Research and Exhibition. Eleanor completed the initial catalogue of Wellspring family materials Nathan mentioned. As they continued through the exhibit areas, she's proposed a special exhibition focusing specifically on how families maintained cultural connections during periods of political transition. This project represented Eleanor's personal connection to the collection while maintaining professional historical standards. Her approach, balancing family interest with scholarly integrity, had become a model for how the center addressed complex questions of historical ownership and interpretation. As afternoon approached, they moved to the center's small cafe that served visitors with refreshments, featuring regional recipes documented in the collection's household management materials. This practical illustration of living history had proven particularly popular, with visitors connecting abstract historical concepts to tangible experiences. Sometimes I still can't believe how dramatically our lives changed because of termite damage, Nathan observed as they watched visitors enjoying historically inspired refreshments. If we hadn't needed to replace those specific floorboards at that specific time, Maya considered this counterfactual with academic precision. I've actually been researching probabilistic factors in historical discoveries, the intersection of financial crisis, structural necessity, and preserved historical materials creates fascinating questions about contingency in historical revelation. Her scholarly perspective on their personal experience reflected how they had each adapted to their new roles. Nathan, applying business principles to historical preservation management, while Maya had found academic focus in analyzing the very experience they had lived through. Their conversation paused as Eleanor approached with a leather-bound volume carefully preserved in a conservation-grade protective case. "You should see this," she said, with evident excitement. The conservation team just completed restoration of what appears to be Thomas Everett's personal journal, the original Heritage Coalition coordinator mentioned in the manifesto. The journal represented one of the most significant textual artifacts from the collection, potentially offering direct insight into the motivations and methods of those who had created the hidden chamber. Its fragile condition had required specialized conservation techniques before content analysis could begin. "The initial entries are remarkable," Eleanor continued, carefully opening the protective case to reveal professionally stabilized pages. Everett explicitly discusses creating a parallel historical record to ensure future generations would have access to perspectives he feared would be systematically excluded from official histories. This direct connection to the original preservationists' intentions validated the center's approach to historical interpretation, presenting multiple perspectives rather than singular narratives about the tumultuous Reconstruction period. What Everett had feared, the erasure of complex historical experiences in favor of simplified political accounts, had indeed occurred in many conventional historical presentations. "There's a passage specifically addressing future finders," Eleanor noted, carefully turning to a marked page. He writes, "To those who discover this collection in some distant time, we entrust not merely objects, but perspectives. We ask not that you judge our actions or beliefs by standards yet unknown to us, but that you recognize our humanity in all its complexity. History belongs not to victors or vanquished, but to all who lived it, with its contradictions and compromises intact." This direct message across time carried powerful implications for their preservation approach. It suggested their responsibility extended beyond mere physical conservation to ensuring the complexity of historical experience remained intact rather than flattened into comfortable narratives. As evening approached and the center prepared to close for the day, Nathan found himself once more on the front porch where their extraordinary journey had begun 2 years earlier with a foreclosure notice and desperate financial calculations. The property that had seemed a burden of debt and obligation had revealed itself as something far more significant, a deliberately preserved historical perspective that might otherwise have been lost to simplified narratives about a complex period in American history. Maya joined him as sunset painted the surrounding fields with golden light, the same fields that had once seemed like failed agricultural investments, but now represented protected historical landscape. The university approved my proposal for a permanent research position attached to the center, she announced. I'll be able to continue my work here while mentoring graduate students in preservation methodologies. This development represented not just personal achievement, but sustainable continuation of the scholarly work their discovery had initiated. The academic partnerships they had developed would extend beyond their personal involvement, ensuring the historical perspectives preserved in that hidden chamber would continue informing broader understanding for generations to come. I received an interesting proposal today, Nathan mentioned, as they watched the last visitors departing. The National Historical Preservation Trust has asked me to consult on developing sustainable operational models for other privately discovered historical collections. Apparently, our approach here has created something of a template for balancing academic integrity with financial viability. This unexpected professional evolution reflected how completely their lives had been transformed by what had begun as desperate home repairs. Nathan's corporate background, which had seemed irrelevant to historical preservation, had proven unexpectedly valuable in creating sustainable approaches to maintaining historical collections outside traditional museum frameworks. As darkness settled over the Carter Heritage Center, brother and sister found themselves contemplating the strange chain of events that had connected them to their family's hidden legacy. What had begun with termite damage and impending foreclosure had evolved into nationally recognized historical preservation that was transforming understanding of a complex historical period. Do you ever wonder if Uncle Elijah somehow knew this would happen? Maya asked as they prepared to lock up for the evening. If he deliberately left the farm to us because he sensed we would discover what he had spent his life protecting? Nathan considered this possibility thoughtfully. I think he knew something important was here that needed the right people to discover it. Whether he specifically anticipated us finding the chamber or just trusted that whoever cared enough about the property would eventually discover its secrets. Either way, he maintained his part of the generational trust. This perspective on their eccentric uncle's lifetime stewardship of the property had evolved as they learned more about the Carter family's connection to the Heritage Coalition. Each generation had maintained the property through financial hardships that might otherwise have led to selling the land, suggesting some level of awareness of its special significance, even if the specific details had become obscured over time. The Historical Commission approved the official historical marker text. Today, Maya mentioned as they completed their evening routine. It will be installed next month during the anniversary celebration. The marker represented formal recognition of the property's historical significance, permanent acknowledgement that what had once seemed merely a struggling family farm was actually a deliberately preserved historical repository with national significance. The text they had carefully crafted emphasized not just the artifacts discovered, but the intentional preservation efforts that had protected diverse perspectives on a contested historical period. As they finally secured the property, For the night, Nathan paused for a final look at what their inheritance had become. The farmhouse that had once represented financial burden and imminent loss now stood as the centerpiece of a nationally significant historical site. The foreclosure notice that had once symbolized failure had itself become a historical artifact. In the center's exhibit explaining how financial crisis had led to extraordinary discovery. "I think Uncle Elijah would be pleased," Nathan observed as they walked to their cars. "Not just that we saved the property from foreclosure, but that we understood what it represented and found a way to share it appropriately." Maya nodded agreement. "We became part of the legacy without realizing it existed. Each generation of Carters maintained this property without necessarily knowing exactly why it mattered, just that it did matter and needed protection. This understanding of their place in a generational continuity had transformed their relationship to both the property and their family history. What had begun as unexpected inheritance of a struggling farm had revealed itself as a link in a chain of preservation extending back to the turbulent aftermath of the Civil War. As they drove away from the center that had once been merely Uncle Elijah's problematic farm, the illuminated sign at the entrance captured the essence of their extraordinary journey. Carter Heritage Center, preserving perspectives since 1870. The termite damage that had seemed like one more financial burden had instead revealed a historical treasure that changed not just their lives, but expanded understanding of American history itself. What the siblings could never have anticipated on that desperate day when foreclosure seemed inevitable was how completely their inheritance would transform both their personal circumstances and historical understanding of Reconstruction-era America. The hidden chamber beneath those damaged floorboards had contained not just valuable artifacts, but perspectives on history that might otherwise have remained buried beneath simplified narratives. All preserved because generations of their family had somehow understood the importance of protecting the property even without knowing exactly what secrets it contained. The Carter Heritage Center would continue growing in scholarly significance and public engagement long after their initial discovery, becoming a nationally recognized model for how private property discoveries could expand historical understanding while honoring original preservationist intentions. And all because Nathan had decided to address termite damage in his uncle's study floor before admitting defeat to impending foreclosure. The once struggling farm had become a legacy that extended far beyond the Carter family to touch thousands of visitors and scholars who gained richer understanding of American history through the perspectives preserved in that hidden chamber. The financial crisis that had initially seemed like the end of their connection to the property had instead revealed its true significance as a deliberately preserved window into a complex historical period, transforming foreclosure threat into historical treasure through a simple act of necessary home repair. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.